I'm going to start this talk off by telling you kind of how I came to think about using this poem for this event. It's partly because I feel as though there's a turning taking place in my life, and I kind of became aware of it. It's okay. I won't see you there, Paul. So, so there was a kind of turning in my life that started in January when I was in New Zealand, and a friend of mine was telling me about a film that he had seen with the other public preceptors, a film called The Salt of the Earth. And it's a film about the quite well-renowned photographer Sebastião Salgado. And I haven't been able to see the film myself because it's not available to purchase at the moment. It's quite new and it's gone. But this is what I remember of the story, that the Salgado, he was a photographer that spent many years wandering around the world taking photographs of the aftermath of wars. So he saw an enormous amount of human suffering. And at some point, he kind of felt it had enough. He'd seen so much suffering. He kind of lost faith in humanity. Now, this might not be the exact story. This is how I remember it. And in a way, it's kind of subjective, really, because that's how I interpreted it. And he went to his ranch in the South American, the Amazonian jungle. And again, there was devastation there. The forest had been ripped down. But he started, to cut a long story short, he started a project called the Genesis Project, and where he rejoiced in the replantation, or the plantation of the jungle, and seeing the jungle regenerate. And this apparently gave him kind of hope, and it was a kind of turning around. And then he went off taking hundreds, if not thousands, of photographs of nature, of regeneration projects all around the world. And so what I got from this story was this: sometimes when you look at enough suffering, you feel as though you've had enough, and you want to turn and look at something brighter. And I realised that I'd spent the last 10 years of my life teaching people how to turn towards their pain. When I set up breathworks with Vidyamala and Ratnaguna, one of the things that you do, first of all, is to help people to accept, to come to terms with their in awful pain sometimes. And then I've taught teachers how to do it, and so on. And I think I've kind of had enough of turning towards the suffering. Unlike Sadanandi, I don't remember having any ugly sisters in my mind. I was rather odd as a young man. I was very lacking in confidence, or shy, probably lacking of self-worth. But I probably just accepted it, that's how it was. But I did something that probably most psychologists wouldn't encourage you to do. I just went around telling myself I was fantastic. Like I was kind of like a tantric guru, and I kind of worked out that, if I became too big-headed, being fantastic, it was better than being too miserable, having low self-esteem. So I kind of thought I'd share that with you, because that is an alternative approach. And it worked for me. And of course, the danger of that is you get a bit cocky. But if you're surrounded by friends like I have, they soon take you down a peg or two, or 3 or 4, or even 10. So I'd really like to focus this talk more on the brightness that comes with what happens when you've looked at the suffering. I have to say, at Breathworks, I've seen it work so well when people turn towards their suffering, when they accept their suffering. It takes quite a long time, sometimes a lot of tissues, tears and pain, you know, of people really accepting what they've got to live with. But once they do that, they start rebuilding a life that includes their condition, and they turn their life around, and they have a quality of life that's kind of almost unprecedented, you could say, for people with those conditions. And I think there are people here today that have come through breathworks in that way. And of course, it does all start with suffering. Even the Buddha said so, even Sanghrahavastus says so, that the Dharma starts with dukkha. It starts with an acceptance that there is dukkha in the world. And Vidyamala, who is, to my mind, a very inspiring person, I know she inspires lots of other people. If you've heard her life story, she talks nowadays about 4 phases that she's gone through in her life. Initially, when she damaged her back and had a car crash, and she was started being in a lot of pain, she went into total denial. She worked 60 hours a week in the film industry just to block out their experience of having to accept that she was in pain. After 10 years, I mean, some people learn these things quicker nowadays, but it took her 10 years, and this is what she tells us. She went into another phase of bargaining, which is where you do all the right things to make your condition better, but of course it doesn't work because you've got a chronic condition that's not going to get better. So everything you do sets you up to fail, because the feedback you get from doing all the right things is that nothing's happening. In fact, sometimes it gets worse, because if you're like her, you overdo it. If you've got a very strong will, you do it even more if it's not working. She fortunately came across the work of John Kabat-Zinn and mindfulness, and discovered actually maybe it was time to turn towards the pain and accept that she was in pain. It was just a very interesting process she went through, working with meditation and so on. And she went through another 10 years. So she went through 10 years of bargaining and then 10 years of of accepting. And then she discovered actually her life had changed so much. She was in a new phase, and she calls this new phase the phase of flourishing. Now, it's not that you ever get free of the phase of accepting, because suffering's always there. You know, life, even if you don't have chronic pain, life is always tripping you up. You know, things don't always go how you want them to. So it becomes unsatisfactory. You get ill sometimes, you have a lot of pain. And we're all getting older. And death is waiting for us, and that can be frightening too. So that's a kind of form of suffering. But I became more and more interested in, wouldn't it be nice to be a trainer that trained people in how to flourish, how to have a sense of well-being, of brightness, of being like a radiant lamp. And I'm not quite sure how to do this, but I thought, you know, this is where my life, I'd like to take my life. I'd like to kind of write a new program, if you like, the one of moving from pain, living well with flourishing, something like that. I thought this poem, as good as it is, it's not a Buddhist, it's not written by a Buddhist, so I thought it was appropriate to kind of look for some turnings in the Buddhist arena. The poem actually was written by a Universalist Unitarian minister called Christine Fry, who lives in California. So I started being an extreme perceiving type. I started thinking about turning, and you know, all sorts of things came to me, and I have to be careful not to go off at tangents here, because I'd start sharing with you. But one of the things I thought was interesting, which I will share with you, is, of course, in Buddhism, and even if you're a beginner and you've done a Buddhist course, I'm sure you must have come across this. You must have come across the wheel. Has everyone come across the wheel of life? Yeah. Well, if you haven't, go back and ask someone to demo. But a wheel turns, doesn't it? Yeah. So I thought, oh, wheel turning. And then there's a teaching that comes out of the wheel of life, and that is the spiral. And the spiral path has kind of 12 stages. And it's a very, very interesting path, and I think it's one that's not really reflected on enough, as far as I can see, because it's all about brightness. It's just all about more and more brightness and clarity until you see things as they really are, and it transforms your life totally and completely. So, I want to be an advocate for the spiral path. But the spiral path too starts with dukkha. It starts with the acceptance that there is dukkha in your life. And what's supposed to happen, that if you do really accept, really turn towards life and look at your life, whether it's, I tend to look at external things because I'm an extrovert in the Myers-Briggs system. And other people apparently look inwards at their own mental states and things like that. I look at all the horrible things that are going on in the outside world more than I look at the things that might be going on in me. So I don't think I have any problems because I'm not interested in those. It all starts with suffering. There's a lot of suffering. And as I said before, if you spend too much time on suffering, you just get depressed, and well, I do. And you kind of think, actually, is it really worth living? And you could go in that direction. But the spiral path, once you accept there is suffering in the world, it's as though something new arises. It's called Saddha or Shraddha in Sanskrit. And this is what Sanghrahavastus has got to say about it. He says it's the healthy counterpart of Tana or Trishna, which means thirst or craving. That's thirst or craving for conditioned existence. Thirst or craving for all the things that I think are going to make you happy in this life. It develops when, as a result of our experience of the world, experience of the painful, unsatisfactory and frustrating nature of samsaric, worldly existence, we begin to place the heart not so much on the conditioned as on the unconditioned. At first, this is no more than a vague, intermittent stirring of the emotions, hesitant and confused. But as it grows stronger, and as its object become more clearly into focus, it becomes more clear and focus of what we're doing. So as the stirring grows, we get more and more faith, we get more confidence, we have a longing even for something higher. And then what's supposed to develop independence upon this is another state that is very joyful, where we experience a kind of cheerfulness, a positivity. It's as though we feel brighter, less attached to things. And if that wasn't enough, just having joy, if we go on focusing on this, we start to experience something called pretty. I always like this word pretty. It doesn't mean you look beautiful, but it's kind of, it's quite easy to experience this if you want to. It's when you kind of sit there, meditate, and you go, oh, you get this kind of upsurging of energy that kind of lifts you almost off your cushion. And it can become extremely powerful. It can even raise the, when you get a fright of something or something happens and you get that shiver going through you. Well, that's kind of pretty. It's not a state you want to live with all the time because, it's kind of, shaking all the time. People think you need help. But fortunately, as that kind of wears out, and you kind of calms down, you have a state of just kind of sheer calm, relaxation, and then this eventually turns into bliss. And then after that, you get concentration, you get clear, you see things as they really are. And then there's a few more stages. So dukkha was just one of those. The rest is all about there's something that's so wonderful and bright that we can all experience if we want to. It's just simply that one thing arises in dependence of the preceding one. So you have to be prepared to turn towards without fear, with a sense of confidence that you can turn towards the suffering, and out of this will arise a sense of things just becoming more and more bright and more wonderful. Sometimes it's even said that, in fact, in the secular mindfulness world now, I heard the other day, that mindfulness is often talked about as like turning on a light bulb. It's like you turn on the light, you bring mindfulness to your condition. It's going, oh yeah, I've got self-critic, or I've got this going on, or this going on. And that compassion brings with it kindness, so you kind of care about yourself. So it's quite good to think of mindfulness in that way, isn't it? Like turning on a light. That the more mindful you are, the brighter you are. And I'm going to go back to that reading I read yesterday about the radiant lamp. That when you meditate, you become like a radiant lamp in a moment. Dukkha, by the way, isn't exactly about... When we turn towards dukkha and we turn towards our suffering, sometimes, and we use this term a lot in the secular mindful world, it's about accepting who you are. Now the problem with this is our teacher, Sanghrahavastus, has said we shouldn't accept how we are. So there's a kind of conflict here, apparent conflict. It's not really a conflict. It's simply that, yes, you do need to accept where you are. It's a bit like if you want to go anywhere, you need to work out where you are, don't you? Like if you want to get home and you can look at the map, you've got to find Coddington. I mean, if you've got sat-nav, it will do it for you. But if you were using the old-fashioned method, you'd have to work out, or if you're going to go for a walk, you've got to work out where you are, and then you can go there. But if you don't know where you are, you don't know where to go. So it is necessary to accept that you're in Coddington, just as you have to accept that you're a bit screwed up, or you've got problems and things like that. And but that's all right. It's just how you are, starting point. And now you can become more. You can become more than that. You can become fantastic, particularly if you tell yourself you are. So a kind of new me begins to arise, and we have a sense even of a higher self. I don't know if you've ever tried doing this, but I guess you've all probably tried being aware of what's going on in your mind, haven't you? Has everyone done that? So you all know what I'm talking about. What is it that's being aware of what's going on in your mind? Have you ever asked yourself that? Have you ever sort of thought, what's this part of my mind that's now watching this other part of my mind? It's as though you've got another mind that's kind of moved back, and you think, oh, look, it's a thought. Hello, thought. Goodbye, thought. And then there's an emotion. Hello, emotion. Goodbye, emotion. And it's sensations in the body. Oh, sensations in the body. Goodbye, sensations in the body. It's as though you're kind of moving back. And if you ever try to focus your attention on what it is that's watching, it's like trying to grab your hand with your hand. It's not really possible to do. But what I found, if you actually make that more the focus of your experience, all sorts of funny things happen. Like you might suddenly just go like that, because it's quite powerful. And it's as though you're now starting to access a higher self. Sometimes people talk about the human brain even as having two parts, like the left brain and the right brain. The part, at least, if it's not absolutely accurate, the part that deals with conception, language, ideas, the part that we use most of the time, if not all the time, that gives us a sense of confidence. But every now and again, another part seems to come alive, and it tells us what to do. So in that story of the man in the snow getting lost, he was sure where to go. And it's as though this other part of you has a perspective that you just don't have in your ordinary part of the brain. So as though you have access to a higher self that knows better than the lower self. And it's something to play around with and just kind of, think maybe I try and drop back and become the mind that's watching the mind. Of course, the mind that's being watched stops happening, so there's nothing to watch. So you have to kind of re-establish it, and that's what you call distraction. And then you can start watching it again, but then you go, oh, it's gone. But it will lead to possibly other things happening. Not only with the light, as you become brighter, you also start having a sense of caring more. Some people perhaps need to start with caring for themselves. If you have a tendency to put yourself down a lot, then maybe that's your starting point. But compassion really is about other people. So in some ways, self-compassion is a bit of a paradox to me. I'm not really sure what it means, because it simply means being with suffering. But usually it means about other people. And compassion, of course, is the counterpart of wisdom. That you can't have wisdom without compassion. So if anyone tells you they've had an insight into non-self or into reality, what you will expect them to exhibit is a greater sense of compassion for other people. If you're not experiencing that and you think you've got insight, you might like to question whether you've got real insight or not, because you can't have one without the other. It's like two wings of a bird, as is often said. And as compassion arises, you start to live the spiritual life not just for yourself. In fact, you could say, and I think Sanghrahavastus said something like this, there is no spiritual life if it's about self-development, simply about self-development. It is about self-development, but the self-development has to include others. Which is why, on this weekend, we're having these talks about Sangha building. If we're not building the Sangha, if we're not uniting as a community, we're probably not leading the spiritual, living the spiritual life. So it's something, to go away and reflect on. You may disagree, you may see things in a different way. And the Bodhisattva, the being that we can all become, who devotes their time, their energy, their inspiration into living the spiritual life because they care, or we care, for others, including ourselves, not excluding ourselves, usually exhibits kind of four modes of beings, four modes of being. And you could call these, in Sanskrit, these are called the Sanghrahavastus, or they're sometimes called the means of unification. It's simply that the Bodhisattva, by just being what he or she is, starts to unify people into the Sangha. Now, if you're interested in becoming a Bodhisattva and unifying the Sangha, you can also work it kind of the other way round. You might think, actually, I'm still telling myself how fantastic I am. And, I'm a Bodhisattva, but, what do I do? Well, you look at what Bodhisattvas do. This is how Buddhist ethics are, actually, is that we have these 5 precepts. All they are, that's not like a philosophical system, it's just built upon how a Buddha is. A Buddha behaves in this way. And so we can become a Buddha by behaving in the same way as a Buddha. It's kind of simple as that, really. And we can become a Bodhisattva by perhaps making a little bit more conscious an effort to work with these Sanghrahavastus, these 4 ways of unification. And of course, the first of these, you probably could guess this one, is the thing that we ask you to do most at centres. What would that be? Dana, that's right. We sometimes tell you that the centre needs your money to survive, but actually what we're telling you is that you need to give in order to practice a spiritual life. And sometimes that sounds a bit of a con, doesn't it? Like, it's a salesman trying to get money out of you. But it has been shown. I was at a conference a couple of years ago, a conference that a woman was giving on well-being. And, I think David Cameron's previous government had this whole idea of the mindful Britain, and then well-being and so on, and to put some money into this institute in Cambridge. And they've been developing well-being. And now they've got on to flourishing as well, by the way. Well-being's not enough, so they want people to flourish. But I remember seeing all these graphs and statistics that showed when people are generous, they actually have a sense of well-being and they're happy. So you kind of think, well, if I give away things, I'm going to be unhappy because I'm going to lose them. But it's the opposite. And actually, you can go by your own experience, can't you? You know, when you really genuinely give something to someone and you're communicating with them, it's wonderful and it makes you feel good. And so it all starts with dana, of just giving. Funnily enough, if you practice any one of these, you also practice all four of them. You don't know what the other three are yet. But one of them, of course, is exemplification. And exemplification is like giving dana. You're exemplifying what a bodhisattva does. A bodhisattva gives. So there could be a whole process that goes on in our centre. We could, in fact, Bhante has this aphorism. He says you could say a spiritual community is characterised by the constant exchange of presence amongst its members. Now, I would like to just rejoice in the Manchester Centre, because the Manchester Sangha, because I think you actually do practice this quite a lot. But there is I see a lot of exchange of presence going on. And you know, when people leave and so on, there's always presence, there's rejoicing, people going to get ordained, there's a lot of rejoicing in that. There's a lot of sharing that goes on already. And it's a really good thing to do, isn't it? And it really makes you feel happy doing it. You as the person doing it and the person receiving, it kind of unifies you into, I was going to say into kind of more like a family, but I know some people have difficult families, so that might not, but let's stay with Sangha, into a kind of an association, a community that is united. But apparently the more we give, the more united we become. So if we're constantly giving things, just think how wonderful it would be. Sometimes people don't know what to give. I'm one of those people. I never quite know what to give people. But I was thinking the other day that when I lived in Sweden, and I lived for a while in Germany, it was very common when you visited people to take a bunch of flowers, even men. Men gave flowers to men, which in this country doesn't usually happen. So I'd like to invite you all to give me flowers whenever you were at a loss of a present to give me. And you could do this with everyone else. It's, a flower doesn't cost much, and a plant maybe even better. But you could just, bars of chocolate don't always work because people are on special diets and things like that. But and that's what happens with me. I kind of get caught up in what to give someone, and I don't give anything. So I'm going to stick with flowers in future. But that's the first thing to do. And of course, when you're giving, as I say, this is a kind of a means of exemplification, but I'll return to exemplification in a moment. But you usually also practice the second of these four modes of unification, and that is loving speech. Because you don't say, here's a flower, here you go. Well, you might do, but it might sort of be in a pleasant way. If you're a bloke, that's maybe your starting point, because you don't quite know how to get all sweet and lovey-dovey, But you could find a more sophisticated way of giving a flower. Well, look, I found this beautiful flower. I'd just really like to give it to you. There you go. So, sometimes we do need to speak our mind, and that can come across a little bit harsh. It's not that we shouldn't complain about things when they need complaining about, but it needs to be done on the basis of what the other person needs to hear, not just us getting something off our chest. Or if that's what we need to do, because sometimes that can be a useful thing too, it's a way of turning and accepting something, we need to set up the conditions that we can do it so we're not just being angry. Because using harsh speech and unkindly speech can lead you to mental states of irritation and anger and so forth. Whereas kindly, loving speech will lead you to mental states of caring, kindness, gentleness towards others, and towards yourself too. So that's another thing we could consider doing. We could consider how we speak. Is it loving? Sometimes, one of the things we often do, and Sanghrahavastus has been very keen on his disciples, people like me and you, not doing, is using what he calls harsh speech. If you become an order member, it's one of the precepts is not to use harsh speech. And harsh speech includes expletives, particularly the F word, which has kind of come into common usage. But if you actually, as you become more and more sensitive, because you've moved from dukkha to joy, to radiance, and so on, you become more sensitive. And as you become more sensitive, when people go, oh, F, it kind of creates a jar for you. It's quite unpleasant. I mean, if you're not sensitive, of course, you just go, yeah. And, you just stay at that level. But actually, if you start thinking, actually, I don't want to do that, I want to be a bit more sensitive, you do become sensitive, and it can be a bit jarring. So then you could ask your friends, say, do you need to say the F word? Couldn't you just say, oh, shut the door? That's still an expletive, but gradually you learn to go from, catching yourself, like you go, yes, well, and you kind of, you can hold things back sometimes. You can do this with mindfulness. Usually, when you're very unmindful, like me sometimes, a thought comes in your head and it pops out your mouth. And so we can all work with that, all of us, and we can all have a more loving approach to life. Doing good is another one of these modes. Arthur Chara, it's just literally doing good. Beneficial activity is another word for it. It's not necessarily beneficial activity of good doing in the worldly sense, although this is a good starting point. It's just you see someone who needs some help and you just help them. But for the Bodhisattva, doing good is the good that comes from helping people to develop spiritually. So sometimes just, doing something for someone might seem good, but actually if you could do something more that helped them to consider self-development, that would be even more wonderful. I mean, it could get tricky, couldn't it? Because someone asks you for some change, and you think, oh, I'm not sure about giving them some change. And you start saying, what are you going to do with the change when I give it to you? And then, I mean, I know people that do this. I really admire them. They kind of take the whole conversation round into one of self-development. So what are you going to do with that? And so here you are, stuck here, and you'd have to be quite imaginative how you do it, because you could get lumbered with them, and that sometimes happens. You have to take them off for a meal, and then sit with them talking for a while. But if you're a real bodhisattva, you might consider doing that. But you might choose your friends and people you deal with carefully. But it's that kind of helping, at least, that's leading people on to a higher state, to a higher level. It's not being evangelical or saying, hey, you know what you need is the Dharma. I mean, that might be appropriate with some people. But it's kind of saying, I go to this Buddhist centre, God, it's really peaceful there. It's right in the middle of the city. It's great when you've been out shopping, it's all a bit stressful. You go to the Buddhist centre, you have a cup of tea, and it kind of makes you feel better, just doing that, and you feel a bit more tranquil. People walk around smiling. I mean, you walk in the door, they smile at you. Oh, maybe we ought to add that here as the fifth Sanghrahavastus. It's smiling. I mean, if you're always looking serious when people come in the door, they're going to get put off a little bit. So you've got to practice smiling. And so you can help people simply by smiling in the Buddhist centre when people come in, tell people about it. And in all sorts of ways, I think you get my meaning, don't you? So it's kind of like, it's not just doing any good doing, but it's good doing that leads people on to a higher level. And then exemplification. Well, exemplification is actually you taking your spiritual life seriously and becoming more. Sometimes we think it's enough to do good in the spiritual life. I have to say that in my life, I've been an order member now for 40 years, and because I kept telling myself I was fantastic and I was going to have to walk the talk. And I wasn't really fantastic, of course, but I was telling myself that. I started thinking one of the best things to do when something was needed, and someone said, "Would someone like to do it?" Just put your hand up before you even thought about it. And I thought that's a good thing to do. So I noticed that I ended up doing all the things that other people didn't want to do. Like, I've been a treasurer so many times of trustees. It's not that I particularly like money, or in fact people usually don't like me being the treasurer because I tell them that there's no money and they can't do anything. But I end up being the person because I put my hand up, and someone has to do it. I've also been a chairman, as we used to call it, many times, and I think I did it because it needed doing. I don't remember ever really volunteering for it. I volunteered because I saw it needed doing. It wasn't like I thought, oh, you know what, bit of status, I'll be a chair, people look up to me. Of course, you never know what your motives are. Maybe there was an unconscious thing of that. But usually, first time it happened, I was with Bhante, and it was at Padmaloka, and the person that was chair was leaving, and he said, "Well, of course, this requires us to have a new chair." I remember I can still visual walking around the garden. I said, "Oh, well, I wonder who that could be, Bhante." He says, "Yes, I wonder." And gradually, I kind of dawned on me that he was talking about me. So I said, "Oh, I could do it." He said, "Oh, great." I think I was four times I was chair at Padmaloka on various occasions. And the one time I did take on being a chair, because I thought it would be a good thing to do, is when I set up a centre in Sweden. And that was the worst thing I think I could ever do. I mean, I set this centre up, and I thought I'd become a somebody, like Sweden was the place that Sona set up. That's what I'd be known for. But it didn't really work out, actually. That wasn't my, skill strength, setting up centres. I actually was good at laying foundations. But, no one ever gets rejoiced for laying foundations. It's what goes on top of the foundations that people say, "Wow, look at that centre, he built that," or someone. They say, "Wow, there must be some big foundations under there." I wonder who built those. So I kind of thought the Sweden project was a bit ill-conceived, because I thought, I could be someone. So beware. Anyway, these are the 4 things you can do. You can practice, quite literally, just even making a precept of it. Shall I tell them what a precept is now, or do you want to do it now? Okay, a precept's a really good thing to do. It's taking our training principles. We recite 5 precepts, but it can become quite sort of automatic, can't we? We just say, I've got my on now. I've got my brain. Deeds of loving kindness, of course. We purify our body. Well, we kind of say these things, and they're having an effect on us, because you put an idea into our head, and it kind of walks around, and we do change. But we could also put the idea in of kindly speech, for instance. We could put the idea in of dana. We take on dana in a way where we're going to give something away every day. We take that on as a training principle, as a practice. And we could also ask our friend to, have a kind of mate who's doing another precept to check whether we're doing the precept. So did you give anything away today, or this week? Which days did you miss? Come on, be honest. And you kind of think, oh yeah. And so you can actually help one another. You can have a buddy. That's what I was looking for, the word buddy. With a precept, it's not a vow. You actually decide you're going to do it, and you get someone to pull you up when you're not doing it. If you do all these things, you start building the Buddha land. This is why the Bodhisattva is, this is the aim of the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva's aim is to build a Buddha land. The aim of our centres are to build Buddha lands. Within our centre, it's not just to teach the Dharma. In fact, under Exemplification, Sanghrahavastus says that, doing good, under that one, he says that the Bodhisattva doesn't teach the Dharma. It's not the giving of knowledge that the Bodhisattva does. He inspires, or she inspires, people to practice. So it's a different kind of teaching. It's a kind of helping people to do something by encouraging. And people often don't think they can do certain things. And so a lot of encouragement, a lot of inspiration is needed. This is the act of the Bodhisattva. If we could imagine the Manchester Buddhist Centre, as good as it is, being even better than it is, with us all practicing the Sanghrahavastus of giving presents to one another, helping out wherever we can, just being, you know, a smiling, radiant lamp there in the reception when people come through the door. You know, it is wonderful sometimes when I walk through the door, people are sitting around chatting, and people do look up and smile. So, you know, it's not that we're not doing it, but we can do all these things much more, and it will have a wonderful effect on us. Meditation is something I just wanted to mention too, is that sometimes we think meditation is just about changing our mental states, but I'd just like to go back to this reading yesterday, because I don't think this gets enough publicity really. It's the idea that meditation actually changes the world. I was thinking about this, and because I think a lot, and I was thinking that when you think that meditation could actually change the physical world, someone's going to say, does it really? Is that true? Can it? Well, then I thought this would be my answer. The physical world only exists in your perception. Whether it exists outside of that is just a moot point. You know, you can't prove it or not. All you've got is your perception. You know, light comes in through your eyes, turns upside down, an image forms in the back of your eyes, stimulates some rods in the back of your eyes, sends a signal to the brain, and you see a tree. That's the external material world that you see. If your brain operates in a different sort of way, that tree's relationship to you will be different, won't it? So it's all quite commonsensical. Of course you can change the external world. You can change the other way people see the external world. So Milarepa, in this story, he says that in the midst of many manifestations, I felt as if I were a radiant lamp. All instructions thus became clearer than ever before. So he understood things more. But Sanghrahavastus makes these comments. He goes even a bit further. He says, usually we are bombarded by all sorts of influences and impressions, which have an unfortunate effect upon us. But when we meditate, we are generating very powerful, very positive, very skillful states. So it's as though we start taking the offensive. We become active rather than passive. Do you see what I mean? We not only become positive, we become bright. Not only bright, but clear. It's as though we are no longer under the influence of the things that surround us, but that we are, but they are under our influence. We are like a radiant lamp dispelling the darkness. In the light of that radiant lamp, all instructions thus become clearer than ever before. There is a heightened positivity, a stronger experience of individuality. You don't feel so crushed, so overwhelmed by the world. You feel more powerful than your surroundings. The lamp is not overwhelmed by the darkness. So this is what we can bring to our centres. We can dispel the darkness of people's mental states, dispel the darkness that we can feel from all what's going on in the world, and we can bring brightness. It's not that we don't acknowledge and accept all those other things. Of course we have to. But at the same time, our focus could be more and more on the positive. And the spiritual life is a very, very positive, albeit very challenging path to take. But as we all practice, the Sangha will be unified, and it will kind of have a knock-on effect. It will be easier to practice. The more unified we are as a Sangha, the easier it is to practice the spiritual life. The more we practice the spiritual life, the more we will unify the Sangha. The more the unified Sangha, the easier it is to practice spiritual life. And in no time, we will all be at least Bodhisattvas, if not Buddhas. Thank you.